Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Fahri Apaydın, professor. I'm a professor at Yalova University, and also I am the founder of Association of Ethics in Academia in Turkey. Our aim, our association's aim is to increase awareness and sensitivity among academicians about ethics in Turkey, ethics in academic research. We do various activities to accomplish this goal. We interview to make transfer of experience and knowledge from other universities. We do some interviews from other countries, academicians from other countries. And today, our guest is Professor Celia Fisher. First of all, I'm very grateful. I must say that I'm very grateful to Professor Fisher for accepting our interview, because this will be really a big contribution to our mission. Welcome, dear Professor Fisher.
Thank you so much. It's really a privilege to engage with you and your organization.
Okay, Professor Celia Fisher is from Fordham University. She's director of Fordham University for Ethics and Institute, and she's the author of Decoding the Ethics Code, a practical guide for psychologists research, psychologists, and also the Handbook of Ethical Research with Ethnocultural Populations and Communities, and also research with high-risk populations, balancing science, ethics, and law. Today, our topic is ethics in supervision. Before starting our topic, could you please introduce yourself briefly, dear Professor Fisher?
Sure, I'm delighted to. I'm a psychologist, research psychologist by training. I'm a professor at Fordham University. I established the Center for Ethics Education at Fordham in 1999. So we've been working for a long time. We have a master's program as well as a bioethics minor. I also am an endowed professor who teaches in our applied developmental research program, where I mentor doctoral students in research, very relevant to today's topics. I also have federally funded institute called the HIV and Drug Abuse Prevention Research Ethics Institute, where we train early career scientists in how to conduct empirical research on research ethics. And related to this particular talk today, I've also conducted research on how doctoral students feel about mentorship in ethics.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe that we should collaborate. Academicians from every culture, from every university, as science is universal, collaborate to promote academic ethics. And your contribution is very important for us. And I want to start with two questions, dear Professor Fisher. First of all, how important is academic ethics in the development of science and scientific studies? And related with this, following this question, what is the role of ethics in the relations between a supervisor and the student? This relationship is, of course, very important in that the students later on become academicians, and they can take the supervisor as model. So the transfer of academic culture from one generation to another generation is affected directly from this relationship. So this is very important. What would you like to say?
Well, teaching within the sciences and as well as supervision of trainees is critical in providing future citizens as well as future researchers with the knowledge and skills for critical and compassionate engagement in creating a caring and just world. professors introduce students to the moral foundation of the sciences as a method as well as a profession. And as we can see from what's currently going on in terms of some individuals distrusting science, that as academicians, we're not just addressing scientists in the moral foundations of science, but also individuals who are going to be non-scientist citizens. So they will trust in the kind of work that scientists do. And we engage our students in ethics, not only through pedagogy, but as you said, through modeling of behaviors. In doing this, we have an obligation to establish relationships of loyalty and trust with not only our institutions, but our students and members of societies who rely on academic institutions to provide knowledge, skills, and career opportunities claimed by any specific degree program. And so in establishing our laboratories, our practicum experiences, our pedagogical lectures, we need to always infuse them with the ethics of our particular field. In adhering to ethics ourselves, we're also acculturating our students to ethical standards. We did a study a number of years ago with 1,000 graduate psychology research students in the United States. And we found that if the mentor did not talk about ethics, but also if the department didn't communicate how important ethics was in the profession and in academia, that the students had less confidence in the integrity of the profession. So clearly, it's not only a professor's responsibility, but a department's responsibility to consistently demonstrate adherence and commitment to the ethical standards of their particular science. So that's the first question. You asked the second question was, what is the role of ethics in the relationships between a supervisor and student? Obviously, a supervisor has to demonstrate a commitment to ethical conduct of both, not only in terms of how they conduct their research, but also how they conduct their supervision. And in science, this means that research assistants and students are taught how to engage in the highest standards of the profession. In the physical and biological sciences, this may mean taking accurate notes, not modifying material or data to fit a hypothesis, and demonstrating appropriate care for animal subjects. And in the social sciences, it means demonstrating a respect for human participants through informed consent and designing studies that minimize risk and maximize benefit. It also takes a professor and a supervisor taking responsibility for mistakes that are made and to demonstrate how the skills necessary to correct mistakes and move on to projects that may or may not work. But most importantly, the kind of modeling that's most helpful as a supervisor is to establish a timely and specific process for providing guidance and feedback to students and supervisees. So this requires not only spending time on the ethics of the field, but also letting students know in the beginning of any venture with a professor or a supervisor, what is the basis for the evaluation of their work? What kind of feedback is going to be given? What are the deadlines? How often are they going to be evaluated? What is the timing and the nature of feedback? That is how we establish these relationships of trust.
Thank you very much. From what we have said, I understand that academic ethics is, scientific development depends on academic ethics. Without academic ethics, it is not possible to develop scientifically, and it's not possible to make or to carry out scientific studies. How much should a supervisor be involved in a student's dissertation?
That's a great question. You know, the dissertation is both a period in which a student is learning how to become an independent scientist, and then throughout the course is able to demonstrate that they are an independent scientist. So that means that the role of a supervisor changes during the time course of a dissertation. So for example, in the beginning, a dissertation may be the first time that a student actually is doing their own research and not collaborating on a project that's already the supervisors. So the supervisor at the beginning needs to help select the topic and set of hypotheses that are both novel and can be rigorously tested. So this requires a certain amount of guidance in terms of reviewing the literature, helping the student know what literature to review, and identifying appropriate methods, and how to go about the task that's involved. But then mentors should also not ignore obviously poor choices. But as the process goes on, they also have to assess the extent to which the student has the capacity to become an independent scientist. Some students may not have the skills necessary to produce that independent work. And here it's important for the mentor to evaluate what is going on and to perhaps make recommendations for additional makeup types of education for the student to be able to evolve in an appropriate way.
Well, another determinant, I think, could be the capacity of the students, how much the student needs help. That's also another important determinant of how much supervisor should be involved in a student dissertation.
Absolutely. And so that has to be evaluated in the beginning. And as I said, some students may not be ready. And if that is the case, then they really need to be informed about that. I don't think most mentors in those kinds of situations can act independent of a department chair and the department, because they also need support. Sometimes students are obviously stressed when a mentor is telling them that they need to do more work in order to have the skills to conduct their dissertation. And often that requires the assistance of program directors, chairs, and other members of the department.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question I want to ask is, will it be okay to say that the dissertation is a common work of a student and their supervisor?
So that's another interesting question. So students and supervisors are clearly collaborators on their dissertation. However, their roles should change from a master's or apprenticeship model or early research experiences through the dissertation. In most cases, when a student is just learning in an apprenticeship model, the mentor often takes the leadership role or a co-equal role in designing the study and guiding and implementing the analysis. However, the leadership role needs to change for a dissertation because, as I mentioned before, by the end of this work, the student has to demonstrate that they have the intellectual and scientific ability to become an independent scientist. And so the process of a dissertation, who's the leader, should really shift by the end of a dissertation. The student, so in this collaboration, the student should be the person that writes the publication, takes leadership authorship on the publication, is responsible for conducting the analysis, should take a leadership and demonstrate they have the ability to interpret the data in a meaningful way. So it is a collaboration, but who takes the leadership role should ultimately change if, in fact, we're saying when the student completes their dissertation that we're welcoming them into the field as an equal.
Okay. Then, how much should a supervisor be responsible from the ethical violations of students in their dissertations?
This is another great question. So, once again, it's kind of a time course issue. The supervisor is responsible for ensuring that the student is aware of ethical standards of the field. This can be through direct instruction or modeling. We found, for example, that many mentors in science never really talk about ethics. with their students. And if they're not required to submit proposals to an ethics review board, the student may never really have direct encounter with ethical standards of the field. The mentor should also ensure in a dissertation that the proposed study is possible to carry out ethically, and certainly should be alert to any deviations. However, if a mentor determines that a student has elected to ignore ethics or to lie or to plagiarize or fabricate data or not follow human subjects protections, then it's clearly the mentor's responsibility in correcting these in a way and informing the department, following protocols that may result in the student not graduating or having to recollect data.
Thank you very much. It was really enlightening information. How much responsible are supervisors when students become unsuccessful with their dissertations?
So when a student's dissertation is unsuccessful, that's a really important question. So some students cannot complete a dissertation. It may be that they're not able to write a successful proposal, even at the beginning, even with guidance from the supervisor. It may be that they're not able to implement or appropriately analyze data once a dissertation has been approved. The responsibilities here lie in what I've said before in terms of setting guidelines in the beginning of the process. How many drafts are going to be acceptable? What is the feedback that the mentor is going to provide? What is the time frame for a final proposal? Is there a certain period of time in which, if in fact several drafts have been submitted but not accepted, that the student cannot go on in that particular process? If in fact they're implementing the dissertation because their proposal has been accepted, then similar guidance has to go into effect. What is the time frame for completing the data collection? How many times can a draft be submitted to the mentor? What is the time frame for having a successful draft accepted? On the other hand, a good proposal and a good dissertation does not mean that data is publishable, because we all know that sometimes we create really great research designs, but our hypothesis is not proven. And so it may mean that the study did not come out the way that was anticipated, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't conducted well.
Thank you very much. When do you think an academician should withdraw? Under what conditions should an academician withdraw from supervisor position?
So I think there's at least two situations in which that would be appropriate. One is that sometimes you're working with a student, and as their dissertation ideas are developing, you realize that you don't have the expertise that's needed to guide the particular topic that the student wants to pursue. It could be that you don't have the background information on theory, or it could be that you don't have expertise in the kinds of methods that would be necessary. And in that condition, in that situation, it's certainly appropriate to resign. Another situation has to do with the fact that supervision is a relational process. But it's a relational process that's bi-directional. It involves respectful consideration from both the mentor and the mentee. So, and when there's not respect, or when there's some kind of relationship that's not working out, this can produce stress. And it may be that either the mentor or the mentee is finding it very difficult to maintain appropriate relational boundaries. A mentee may find it difficult to take guidance. A mentor may find it difficult to give appropriate feedback because there just seems to be a communication mismatch. And so if the mentee is not benefiting from the relationship or the mentor is finding that they cannot provide the supervision the mentee needs, then that's also appropriate. However, for both these situations, the expertise reason and the relational reason, you can't, it's a problem if the supervisor resigns and there is not another professor who can supervise the student. Yeah. Because the program has a contractual agreement with that student that if the student is working hard and has the capacity, that they're going to be assured of supervision for their dissertation. So in those situations, the mentor has to work carefully with the program director or chairman of the department to find an appropriate supervisor for the student.
Thank you very much. Okay. What kind of this question will be related with your experience in the States. What kind of ethical problems do you encounter between student supervisors in the USA? Can you give some examples so that we can compare the ones that we live in Turkey?
Well, I'm sure all of us have experienced plagiarism by our students. And of course, there's different levels of plagiarism. Sometimes there's plagiarism that's unintended. A student was taking notes, did not realize that the notes they took were exact quotes. There's now software that we're using in the States that gives you information actually as to the percent of identical information that is in a student's paper or dissertation, and that is in other articles that are out there. And that's very useful. And typically it's like 10, 20% is considered acceptable because there's always overlap in language. And so we have to be very careful about that. But I've also had experiences with direct plagiarism and intentional plagiarism. And one of the things that I found throughout my career is sometimes we see a student plagiarizing in class and we discuss it with them and they say they're sorry and it was a mistake. And we may not report it even though it's required. And what I found over many years is that many times that same student is doing the same thing in a lot of classes. And so I think it's very important to report plagiarism to the department or other mechanisms when one finds it. Another issue, I think that hopefully is not confronted as frequently, but when a student fabricates data. And given that the student in a dissertation is collecting their own data and the professor is not collecting it, sometimes it's difficult to know whether or not fabrication has occurred. There was one experience that I'm familiar with where a student came rushing into a supervisor, so excited they had collected half of their data and it had proven their hypothesis. But when the professor went over the data and the statistical analysis, they realized the student had incorrectly coded the data and that in fact the data was in an opposite direction from the hypothesis. And of course, the supervisor discussed this with the student. What happened after that was that the next half of the data surprisingly supported the hypothesis. So the professor was very concerned that the student may have fabricated both times, but it was difficult to prove. So in discussions with the chair, the department decided that the student would be required to collect additional data with an assistant and to be documenting in a way that the mentor could confirm was not fabricated. A third example is when students submit an article based on partial or some of their dissertation without submitting the article to the mentor, but including the mentor's name. In those situations, typically the mentor will get some information from the journal that an article has been submitted. And at that time, I think it's important that if the mentor thinks it's appropriate that the mentor indicate to the journal that they do not want their name on the paper, that often then results in the journal asking why. And of course, it will probably lead to a non-acceptance of that paper. Those are just some examples, but they're also hard and difficult.
Thank you very much. I am the author of a book called Academic Ethical Violations, the cases, real cases, but we didn't give real names. We just sealed the names so that not to be offensive. I think it will take enough interest from the academicians in Turkey, and many people are really interested in that book. Well, I must say that I really benefited from this interview. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and knowledge and spending your valuable time with us. My final question is: we are, as an association, we want to develop relationships with international scientific institutions. We want to cooperate with international scientific institutions to promote academic ethics in Turkey. What do you advise us to do? What do you suggest us to do?
So I think there's a couple of ways to go about it. One is to hold international symposium or panels where you invite scientists or researchers from other countries who share on a research topic of interest that can result in a set of scientific papers or an edited volume. And that can start a collaboration of ideas. The second is to offer what we find when we're doing international collaborations with new universities that we may not have had contact with before, that it's very important that there's a match between potential collaborators at the two universities, and that each collaborator has something very specific to offer. It may be a new population, it may be tools or techniques or new ways of analyzing data, but it has to be of mutual benefit for the collaborators to get together. And another way is to look for visiting fellowships. There are universities, for example, we have a visiting fellowship in ethics at my Center for Ethics Education, where the requirements are that somebody who's applying is has identified a specific collaborator at our university, that they've discussed the collaboration, and that there's some mutual benefit that will occur between both faculty members.
Thank you very much for this interview. I really appreciate your spending time with us, your valuable time. Do you have final notes or we'll finish the interview?
No, I'm just very delighted, and I'm delighted to learn about your book. And I hope if it's in English, I'll be able to look at it.
We are working on the second version, and it will be in English, international.
Fantastic. So please email me that information when it comes out. I would love to have it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and I want to thank Yusuf and also Aysun Çolak for listening to us. Let me check if there are any questions on YouTube channel. No questions. Thank you very much. Goodbye for now. I hope we will meet in the future, maybe in Turkey or in the States. Take care. Thank you very much.
That would be lovely. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.